The Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Pride Seeds, Nodulator Pro, and Cruiser Max Vibrance Beans.
Bernard Tobin back on the Soybean School, joined by Horst Bohner, OMAFRA Soybean Specialist at Bornholm, Ontario today. Hey, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a gorgeous day to be outside.
Yeah, and it's not too wet, but it has been wet here, which is not a bad thing because it probably needs some showers. But let's talk about this spring, a challenging one. You and I met in your office about 5 weeks ago, and we met inside because it was pouring rain and it was cold.
Yeah.
That persisted for a long time. This crop is pretty late going in. How do you assess where we are now and how we made it through that season?
Yeah, overall, for sure, in terms of a province, we got in later than we would like, right? I mean, May is the time to plant soybeans, and for a lot of us, it was the end of May and even into June. And sadly, some growers still have not been able to plant on heavy clays. So I think it really depends on where you go. Specifically right here, there was a nice week, May 15th to 20th, where we could plant, right? And so I planted these plots here on the 17th of May, which I would consider perfectly normal. And they're at the first trifoliate today, and so they're coming along. They were slow coming out of the ground. It was kind of painful to watch, but they're all here today, or maybe not all, but you know how soybeans are. At least they're a 70% stand, which the beautiful thing about soybeans is that's 100% yield potential. So, you know, it's all good. But it was painful watching them come out because it was so cold after. So, not a fun start, but I think really the same old story that we've always told, you know, August is what's going to make the crop if you've got a decent plant stand today.
And that's the question. I mean, we heard a lot of reports on replants in different areas, a lot of areas, those earlier beans. How are you seeing those things coming through?
Yeah, the crusting this year and the insect damage, the seed corn maggot, again, more than usual. We've got some bean leaf beetle in Essex, and the crusting in Lambton was pretty intense, right? So a lot of those fields, maybe as many as a third on the heavy clays, were seeded again, right, in some regions. And those, fortunately, we've had some heat now, and those secondary plantings are popping up as well. And so the fields are starting to fill. And it being the middle of June, you know, I would expect those beans to yield 5 bushels less than they could have. But that's still not to say they can't go 50 bushels or 55, because it's all dependent on the rest of the year. So I'm optimistic. Things look good right today, and let's see what happens.
Talk about, I guess, some of the pest pressures you're going to have. You've got some stuff going on in this field. The intense. Is this going to be an insect year? This is going to be a
Well, that is a very good question.
I'm full of questions.
No, I mean, we haven't seen any aphids yet, and that's what really scares us, of course, is soybean aphids, because we end up foliar spraying for them. And if it's a dry year, which it doesn't look like it's going to be, but if it is, you know, aphids do a tremendous amount of damage. So we haven't seen any of those, so that's good news. At least I haven't heard of any so far. Bean leaf beetle, we can hit those on the head, and some guys have sprayed already for those in the deep south. And seed corn maggot, more again this year. They seem to be building the last couple of years. And I've never really had a problem here before with seed corn maggot, but this is the first year. And in places, you know, 30% of the stand is gone. I have some plots up at Elora where treated versus untreated is a good stand versus nothing. I mean, decimated. I mean, there's 3 plants every meter, right? Yeah, it's pretty amazing. There's some hot spots, and the value of seed treatments can't be overstated in a situation like that.
Let's talk about white mold. And when we think about getting off to a cool, wet start, maybe some heat, some dry, depending on what happens. What's your thoughts on white mold and what may happen? I'll ask the meteorologist, and I'll ask you.
Well, again, it's the standard answer. It depends. It depends, but it really does depend on the weather, right? And so if we get a lot of moisture and it ends up being a little cooler, like white mold doesn't like it real hot. So if we get a lot of moisture and it's a little bit of cooler summer and we get a thick canopy, yeah, we're going to have to think about white mold control. And we do have some of those plots here with some different varieties, different fungicides, different timings. And last year, even though it wasn't a real white mold year, I was amazed at the response. Seems to have a lot to do with the stress the plant is under, right? So I can't predict if we're going to have white mold. I don't know, right? We'll have to see what the weather does.
Let's talk about foliar fungicides. What percentage of the soybean crop in Ontario is getting one right now, and whether, you know, do you believe that should be higher?
Well, it's a relatively small percentage, whatever the right number is. We don't have statistics on it, but it's relatively small. And so should more? It depends on how you look at a specific field, right? So we have situations where we can get 4, 5, last year here 7 bushel response. Should those fields? Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't take much to figure that out. Our big problem is that on average we still are getting 2.5 bushels, right? And so the average response isn't quite there. So we're really trying to, and have for years now, figure out when and where to get that big response. So should more guys be trying fungicides on soybeans? Absolutely. I think that's how as an industry we learn. Should we all be spraying every field? We're not anywhere close to that, because it's all an economic situation, right? We need to make money at this. It's not just about getting a little more yield.
Some final thoughts on, before I let you go, on 2017, what you see in these fields and around the province now in your travels from a yield perspective. You talked about, you know, hey, we may see a 5 bushel loss here, but hey, if you're shooting for 65, that's still 60 bushels, right?
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't want to make too much of that specific number, because you end up looking silly in the end, because we could have a record crop. It's just too early to know. One thing I do know, some of the stands are so patchy that it's pretty hard to imagine that's a 70 bushel crop, right? Like, we want a minimum of 100,000 plants, which is only 2.3 plants per square foot. That's not a lot, but if you walk some of these fields, there's pockets where it's, you know, 60, 50,000 plants, and still the right decision to leave it alone, because it's only pockets, right? But those areas aren't going to yield what they should. So overall, I think later planting, some insect feeding, some crusting, and those kind of issues, it's not a super start. Time to catch up.
Got it. We're catching up.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for your time today. We're going to come back and visit you in about 5 or 6 weeks, because you've got a lot of really interesting trials you're doing here, and we're going to take a look at some of your results and get some more insights at that time. So we'll see you back here in about 6 weeks. Thanks for your time.
We'll look forward to it.
Awesome.
Take care.